Welcome to a webinar. My name is Julie Forkammer. I work at Klimakultur, which is a non-profit placed in the mountains of Norway, working on engaging the culture sector on climate action. This webinar is part of a series supported by Kulturum on the future cultural arenas and how we can make them best for everyone. And I'm very excited about today's webinar. We're going to talk with Jo Verrent from an organization called Unlimited. And welcome to you, Jo. I'm so excited.
It's lovely to see you again. We met last summer. It's really nice to be back with you again today.
Yes, I heard you talk at the workshop symposium in London about climate justice and creative climate action. And you were amazing. And I'm honored that you would like to participate and share your reflections with us. Would you like to introduce yourself and what is Unlimited?
Absolutely. So my name's Jo Verrent. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm a white woman in my late 50s, sitting at home in Wakefield in the UK, which is kind of in the middle, just down from Leeds, right in the centre of the map. And I'm the director of Unlimited. Unlimited is an organisation that commissions disabled artists to make exceptional work. So we're aware that in the UK, disabled people make up 23% of our population, but usually only around 5 to 8% of our arts audiences, artists, arts workers. And we're here to try and shift that gap, trying to close that gap and make sure that disabled people get access to the arts sector in the way that they should. And we do that through commissioning artists, disabled artists, to make exceptional work. And we do that across all art forms and across all different types of impairments. And we've been going since 2013. We actually started a little bit before. At London 2012 for the Olympics. We were part of the whole cultural programme, but then we started independently after that. And we've supported over 500 disabled artists now in the UK, with over £6.5 million worth of direct investment into art. So it's having big waves, which we're really proud of.
That's amazing. My first question is, when you introduced yourself, you said your pronouns. Mine is she, her as well. But you also said you're a white woman and your age. And I normally don't say that. Do you think I should say that? Or why did you do it? Can I ask you a stupid question like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I think in
Well,
the UK, well, any question comes from a place of curiosity and a place of wanting to know more. So for me, there's no such thing as a stupid question if it's asked with the spirit of genuine curiosity and openness. Um, in the UK, we often describe ourselves very shortly in case there are people attending who are visually impaired, who might be able to hear and follow what's going on, but won't necessarily know who's speaking. So a tiny little description. I used to say that I was tending towards the plump, um, but I've slimmed down a little bit, so I don't feel I have to say that anymore. But yeah, it's just to aid people who are visually impaired.
So I'm also white and in my early 50s. So thank you for that. At the event I met you in the summer, you talked about how the whole cultural sector these days is talking about sustainability and is implementing a lot of plans and events and activities, but that you don't always feel included in that. Would you like to elaborate a little bit? It's a big question.
I think it is. It's so imperative that everybody takes action around climate justice. We won't have a planet to live on if we don't. So we know we absolutely must do that. But it's quite surprising for me how uninclusively we're approaching it. So it's very common for me to turn up at events and people make very blanket statements. I will never fly anywhere ever again. Nobody in my organization will fly anywhere ever again. And when I hear something like that, I always think that it misses the nuance of real lived experience. I don't have a choice but to fly to some events. Slow travel isn't accessible to me. So I have a range of different disabilities, a range of different impairments. And one of them is a condition that's a chronic condition that impacts fatigue, nausea, pain. So I really have to measure out what I do very, very carefully in terms of my energy. And physically picking things up is quite hard work for me. So if I fly somewhere, I can work out exactly when I will need to move things, when somebody else can move things for me, how that actually works. And it's often the most direct route from where I am to where I need to get to. So it's more accessible in that way. And it also takes less time. And for somebody with an energy related impairment, I need to really watch the time that I spend on things, because I then need to go to bed and rest up and kind of do stuff like that. I can't do anything over an 8-hour day without having a severe impact on my next week. So when people make these bold statements about we will never do this or we will only work this way, I constantly have this nagging sense inside me that, oh, well, I can't work in the arts sector then, or I'm not proper, I'm not good enough, I can't do it like that. And it makes me feel really, really tiny. And it's something I've not really talked about much till last year. And it's not just flying, it's everything. It's, I need to use taxis. I can't walk or cycle to a lot of places. I have a huge amount of kit. I'm hearing impaired as well. I always say disabilities are like Pokemon. And for some reason, I've decided to catch them all. In the, yeah, exactly. I'm greedy. I just want a bit of everything. So I wear you can probably just see if I turn around. I've got a hearing aid that's in my head, not within my ear. I have to use a huge number of non-recyclable batteries to power this each week, not even each month, each week. I get through an awful lot of batteries. I have a lot of technical kit that all needs to be charged up and has a kind of 5-hour lifespan. I have to plug it in again. So I guzzle electricity in a way that I can't always control in the same way. Most of my medications, I've got my little box, I take 20 or 30 medications a day. Most of them come in blister packs. To recycle things like that is quite problematic. I take an injection each week. It's in an injection pod. It's a huge waste of materials. It's not something I always have the choice over, which is, you have the sense that you're failing already, because that's what we see disabled people as, failed non-disabled people, which is rubbish from the start, but it's still hard to not have that view internally. And then when you put climate justice on top of that, everything we're being told is quite often stuff I can't do. And so that sense of failure, that sense of not quite being good enough can be really exacerbated. But it's all perfectly possible to turn round and twist round if we think about climate justice rather than simply a race to net zero. What are we actually trying to do here? We're trying to create a just world. And some of us will take more resources than others. But that means we really need others to make more of an effort rather than less.
Thank you so much for this. You have written a brilliant piece of text called Going Green, I'm Ashamed, about these issues. And we were lucky enough to get permission to post it on Klimakultur's page as well. And we will link it in the comments, where you deep dive into these issues. And speaking about these issues from a cultural perspective, how has the response been on a piece about your conflicted feelings about these issues?
So we've had quite a few people reach out personally. I've had a lot of disabled people reach out personally and go, thank God somebody is naming this. Thank God somebody is talking about this. I feel like that. And that's been incredibly reassuring and validating, which is great. There's been tumbleweed, a complete silence from any of our environmental arts related groups. Nobody has reached out or said anything from key organisations in the UK that work there. Part of our work is now to follow up and make sure that people have read it and to see what we can do to influence change. But the strangest response for us was the amount of trolling we got on social media. So we don't usually get a lot of negative kind of, nasty kind of posts. And we really did on this. We picked up, maybe over 50 people going, oh God, that's, how utterly ridiculous. Either because, and from two sides, from climate deniers who were going, oh my God, tiny violins, how ridiculous to get so worked up about something that's so unimportant. And also from climate activists who are saying you're distracting from the main message. It's not about you as an individual. It's not about one person's experience. We all have to do far, far more, and therefore don't take attention away from that.
Wow. How do you feel about that? How do you process responses like that?
I think we were quite shocked at first because, again, the language. I mean, I'm using quite moderate language to describe some of this, and it wasn't necessarily moderate language. It was quite obscene language in some places. So I was quite surprised. We don't necessarily take down negative posts unless they're naming or defaming a particular individual, because we do believe in the in freedom of speech. People have the right to make those comments. But also we wouldn't necessarily respond to them because we don't believe in necessarily feeding a troll in that way, because you just escalate a situation. So it caused us a bit of, how are we going to manage this? How are we going to deal with this? What should we leave? What should we not? I was pleased that there was a response. Any response is always a good response in some way, in that people are looking and thinking. I was disappointed in relation to climate activists, because for me, that is one of the big barriers. If you're not thinking intersectionally, then you are excluding people from a movement. If you're not wanting to get everybody involved, then I think you've missed the whole point of an activist movement, which should be about trying to, from my perspective, about trying to find routes in for everybody. We can't all do the same amount of stuff. We don't all have the same resources. And actually, globally, we don't all have the same issues. So we have to learn to listen and genuinely understand the lived experiences of people who are different from ourselves. And I think there's a real arrogance that comes with thinking you know it all, and thinking you know how people should respond to, a particular climate crisis, unless you do that deep dive into everybody who's impacted and all of the different perspectives. There's never one size fits all. One solution is never enough. We have to be looking at multiple solutions. It's the only way we're going to get forward and actually make change.
I know in Norway, we haven't talked that much about the environmental sector or climate organizations need to be more intersectional. And the climate debate, especially in the culture sector, I feel often is, it looks like me. We all look like me who are talking, and well, not everybody, but the truly understanding of inclusion when we talk about climate issues, also in the culture sector, is a topic I'm trying to learn more about, but also to be better at talking about, because I talk about it, but I don't know how to say this, but I don't think I'm being heard. Or
I think there's a lot of echo chambers. There's a lot of people talking to people who are like themselves again and again and again without it actually spreading, and the conversations involving everybody who need to be engaged. We have a lot of artists that we work with who go, do you know what? I'm really struggling to make a living and exist at the moment as a disabled person within the cultural sector. I cannot add another layer of thinking on about climate impact. I just don't have the mental kind of space for that. And that shouldn't mean that they're not included in the conversation. We absolutely have to include everybody in the conversation, from those who think that they have the capacity to do masses to those who don't have the capacity to act. Just because you can't act doesn't mean you don't want to. It may just mean that you don't have the resources available to you. It's like, if you've got no money, you can't choose where you buy food. You have to, go to the absolute cheapest options. If you have no heating, you have to make decisions you might not make if you did have resources about where you're going to spend your day. And we cannot penalize people for difficult economic circumstances or for barriers they might meet around access. And if you look at the world as a world, which we have to, the people who are being hit most by climate disasters and extreme weather events are the most minoritized groups. And we have to factor that into our thinking too. It's again a sweeping statement, and we don't like those, but it is, there is a class debate going on where one could argue that, it's middle class people creating, more and more extreme situations, for people who don't have the resource to meet them. We have to factor everything in intersectionally to our responses. However uncomfortable or problematic those conversations are, we have to start having them.
How do you think the cultural sector or cultural arenas or cultural events, what's the positive things they can do? I'm often complaining about stuff, but what's the possibilities?
Well, I think in the UK, there's been some brilliant stuff. In the UK, I think people are starting to take it seriously within the cultural sector, partly because that's been mandated as part of our main statutory funding, is that we have to look at, there's no prescription, but there is a clear, if we don't, then it will potentially impact on our funding. So everybody is expected to take some steps, but there isn't a one size fits all approach. And there's some brilliant things happening. There's wonderful work going on within the performing arts sector about the recycling and reuse of costumes and sets and props and stuff like that. Very little is now thrown away and goes in landfill, which is excellent. There's been masses of work there. There's been some beautiful work done on reimagining touring. So instead of a whole company and set and everything flying out to somewhere and performing, maybe 2 or 3 people go and a local company rehearse the piece, and then the tour is much more locally embedded. I love to see that happen. I've seen some beautiful projects where people have really done deep dives into where they get particular elements of their stuff from, and how that then impacts on. We've just taken up residence in a building. We've never had a real office space before. And it's fantastic that we can source a lot of things secondhand. Why do we need, why do we need a phone that is brand new? We don't. We can get a refurbished phone that's just as good. It just might have a dent on the back. Or, we've just bought this big, whiteboard thing that we managed to get for £10, which is tiny. And it's actually really exciting for us to be able to do those things. There's lots and lots of action like that, which is great. There's also lots of people who are really reimagining how they present work The number of presentations that I've done online rather than having to fly or go anywhere is utterly brilliant. Why? And it's so much more convenient for all of us. I don't know where people are listening from today, but my favourite place to listen to webinars from is the bath. As somebody who has a lot of pain, being in the bath is a very comfortable space for me. And I often click on, oh, I've got an hour to listen to something. Right, I'll go and have a bath and do it then. That would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. So there's loads of brilliant things that are happening. It's just that sometimes in our thinking about them, we're not thinking widely enough about how and who we include.
How do we do it? How should the inclusion be
I
effectuated?
think, yeah, I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? How do we make change happen? How do we change mindsets to truly open them up? How do we stop thinking we have all the answers and know best, and instead genuinely listen to other people rather than think we have to indoctrinate other people? How do we make it a true exchange? In my perfect world, if anybody is creating a resource or a how-to guide or this is a way of doing it type thing, I think you have to have multiple voices. I think you have to have multiple examples. I think you have to really look at the most extreme ends to be able to give something that is nuanced and detailed and interesting and thought-provoking about the different ways in which people might be able to respond. I think we're beyond a simple 3-step checklist, because if we had that,
Yeah, thank you.
if we had that and it worked, we would have solved it by now. You know, there's been billions of those that have come out. They haven't worked because they don't apply. And if it doesn't apply to you, you just junk it. You just put it in the bin. So I think bringing more voices in, shutting down our own egos and really listening to the lived experience of other people and finding out how we can weave that into multiple narratives. I think for me, that's what I want to see happen.
Thank you. Thank you for your reflections. And it's a great advice. And I've been making a lot of those how-to guides for cultural actors and stuff. And they have not been inclusive and they have not had different perspectives. And I love to think I have all the answers. So thank you. No, but really, how do we reach a point where we do have organizations working on disability issues, and then we have cultural organizations working with climate issues? How do we get climate into disability and disability into climate?
Well, I think first of all, disability should be everywhere. Disability doesn't discriminate. So there is no reason, like in the UK, there is no reason for 23% of the people working in climate-based organizations should be disabled people. So there shouldn't be a divide in the first place. But there is, absolutely. I think quite often when we work with others, so people who are not like us, we think that we're the expert and we could be helpful to them. No, it's they have knowledge and experience that you don't have. It's the other way around. It's about giving people power and agency. And, it's not, we want to train you to be like us. It's, we want to listen to you in order to find out how we can respond better. So I think it's something about adjusting that power imbalance that's so often there. Disabled people are not thought of as powerful often. They often don't have the resources or the infrastructure because of the barriers that they've faced in the past. So there's a big adjustment to go there in order to get people to trust you in the first place and really feel that you are genuine in your commitment to listen to them. And I think payment is part of that. If we go to an expert in hydraulic power, we would often pay them for their input and their advice. Whereas sometimes when we go to people with different marginalized lived experience, we expect them to be waiting around to give it to us for free. And I think that's that economic imbalance is part of it too. In the UK, we do have issues sometimes about how much some disabled people can earn, but there's always, going back to the barter economy, I think there's always something that you can offer in exchange. If somebody can't receive cash, they can often receive something else in exchange. I think that can be really useful. And I think asking the questions and admitting, it's like it's wonderful to hear you're so open to, we've not done this in the past. And I think that's the first step, isn't it? It's kind of like, oh, we haven't done this in the past. We can do it in the future. So admitting where we may have made, it's not errors, it's part of our learning, it's part of our journey, it's part of our process. But from this point onwards, how do you make what you do more inclusive? What can you commit to?
Oh, thank you, Jo. I think so much about my learning process is just about unlearning. A lot of stuff that I've taken for granted or haven't been aware of. So thank you for these reflections. While we are recording this today, January 10th, 2025, we're in the middle of some big fires going on in California. There's extreme weather events going on all over the world, but happening in Hollywood and Los Angeles, it gets a lot more coverage. And I saw someone post online. She's called Keely Cat Wells and is working with disability. I don't know if she's living in LA, but she was on the run in a car yesterday. And she wrote a couple of things on Instagram. One of them were that with those kind of emergencies, 50% of disabled people have to leave necessary medications and equipment behind. 85% feel excluded from community disaster preparedness efforts and leaving them unprepared. And my question to you is, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in Norway, we are talking so much about cultural arenas being used as emergency preparedness
Spaces.
actions. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's very similar here. The disaster planning doesn't, it again, is not inclusive. It's often either from a disability angle, a financial angle, which equates often to a class-based lens as well. The privileged are those who have resources to act swiftly. But yeah, I live in a household with my son and his partner. His partner is disabled. We would not be able to fit the three of us and all of our medical equipment in the car. So we do have we're lucky enough to have a car. We live right next to a train station as well. We wouldn't be able to use public transport due to the nature of impairments, but we wouldn't be able to fit everything into the car. Also, I don't get all my medications frequently enough to be away for, if I was away for over a month, I would have supply issues with some of my meds, certainly. I don't know so much about my son's partner. Again, it comes back, I think, to like one of the comments on the blog. It's kind of like, we're all so unprepared that we just go for the bleeding obvious first line, this will fit everybody type response immediately. That's not being prepared. Being prepared is thinking it through from a range of different perspectives, being intersectional. In the UK, we are absolutely rubbish at including sign language in our communications about major emergencies. It was one of the big battles during the early part of the COVID pandemic. I say early part because we are still very much in the COVID pandemic. It hasn't gone away, people. It's still very much there. But many, many deaf people felt entirely disenfranchised from any of the information. Because if you watch the automatic captions, they're not 100%. And actually, even if they're 90%, that 10% gap is a crucial gap for understanding. And there is no need for our messaging to be uninclusive. We can include sign language interpreters. We can pre-record, get the captions right, and get the information out there. Often it's just politics that make us do things live and in the moment, rather than practicality. But yeah, I think disaster planning is one of the next big fronts that we really need to think about. It's like, if we are opening up our spaces, are we making sure that we do so in a way that is inclusive? So particularly if there's going to be lots of people in one big space, that creates massive barriers for people with social anxiety, people with intimate care needs, people who just can't cope with being in a room with 100 people. People who need to rest, people who need to sit down, people who need a support worker with them. We need to think all of these things through. So it's not about, have we got a space? It's, have we got multiple spaces where we can manage multiple needs? That's what we can be doing now.
So we have a couple of different programs for the culture sector in Norway on accessibility training for cultural events, which are great. It's Norske Kulturarrangører has a program, and Balansekunst has a program as well. We'll leave the links here in the comment section. And they don't touch into disability or climate issues. Well, disability issues, of course, but not climate issues or extreme weather events or anything like that. And I think maybe if we could expand those programs to include
Absolutely.
those
yeah,
things.
I think it's definite work for us to do. Certainly when we do training around events, for outdoor events, for example, we would be talking about heating, we would be talking about cold, we would be talking about rain. I mean, it's the UK, it's going to rain. And so for an outdoor event, thinking through how disabled people manage in those circumstances. So I was talking to you earlier, I was supposed to be going to an opening event tonight, a cultural event, one that's been really beautifully created and curated. It's the opening of our City of Culture, Bradford 2025. It's also going to be -10 degrees. I can't go. I just can't go and stand around for 2 hours in -10 degrees. I don't have the physical robustness to be able to do that. There may be a beautiful viewing platform there, but being raised up isn't going to make it not -10 degrees. And actually, any kind of portable heating for outdoors is going to create so much climate damage that
portable heating for outdoors, yeah, which can follow. Yeah.
I mean, there are things I can do as an individual. There are things, I've got, hand warmers that I use. I've got a jacket that's got heating pads in it. You can do all of those things, but it's not going to help in that particular situation. So we are going to have to increase, as these events, extreme weather events, are going to happen more and more frequently. I think we're going to have to develop ways of planning that allow us to be more flexible. Say, we might be doing this thing this weekend, or it might be the next weekend. When do we cancel? And what do we put in place for that? Can we plan for those things rather than hope they won't happen? But we do have to start, absolutely. I do think the disability sector needs to start bringing climate in more and more, instead of just saying, oh, we do need straws, which we do need straws. There are many people, it's their only way of intaking fluid. It's not a simple straw ban, doesn't actually help. But I do think there are things that we can do within our planning, which actually start to bring in elements of climate based work too, and I don't think we're there yet.
So I'm speaking from a Norwegian context. I don't know if you are aware of it, but in 2024, Norway was the #1 country in the world in investments in new oil and gas offshore.
Wow.
and we are only 5.5 million people, but we are spending more money on searching for new oil and gas than the US or China or anyone else offshore. And a lot of our fossil fuel sector is owned by the state, which also means that, there's some cultural funding coming from the state, which comes from the oil money, of course, and we tend to think that it's our whole society, which I understand it makes it more difficult for people to talk about climate and to talk about fossil fuels. And a lot of the cultural organization are being funded by the state, which is also, so maybe they can talk about eating less meat and doing really good waste management because that's really safe. But to talk about climate justice and our privilege in Norway on these issues is a much harder sell. And I don't know, you are a brave person, Jo, and you are standing, you've been fighting with Unlimited on a lot of new issues during the last years.
Yeah.
How can we be braver?
I think that we have to look at the global implications of what we as a whole planet are doing, rather than at an individual country by country kind of. We will not have a planet to live on in 50 years if something doesn't change quite radically. As a grandma, that means that I have to, if I want my grandchildren to grow up and actually be able to have grandchildren of their own, and I didn't speak out or I didn't say anything, then I would have failed them in some way. So I do believe that everybody has the imperative to act. I do think every country's response will be different, though. But I think the question that you're really asking is, how do you talk about or bring up subjects when they are against your own interests in some way? And I always think the best thing to do in those situations is, I'm a naturally nosy person. I'm a naturally really curious person. So I love asking questions. What would happen if? If we did this, what would be the potential implications? Is there a way of doing this that doesn't result in this? I also really love asking questions like that to people in power. And I say power with, little kind of speech marks, because nobody actually has any more power than anybody else. We just give it to them. We just offer it to space, or it's based on a financial kind of transaction. And if we look at it human to human, nobody has more power than anyone else. On an individual level, it's just something they've either taken or been given. So I find asking those questions in a cheeky way and really listening to the answers really, really important. I went to I won't say which company, but I went to a company event quite recently that I was invited into. Quite a small event, only about 50 or so people looking at the future. And there were many people there utterly convinced that the future was nuclear power, and that actually the UK should have 7 more nuclear power stations. And I'm old enough to remember Greenham Common and kind of, really going, anti-nuclear power kind of
What
back
is
in
that?
the day. Greenham Common was a big women-led demonstration against nuclear power.
Okay.
In the UK. It was a real kind of moment. Many of us travelled through that period. But rather than attacking, I wanted to know why. I wanted to know what the drivers were. I'm really fascinated to find out, why is that the only solution? And a lot of it, a lot of the thinking at this particular event was based on data management and, the need for massive data banks because of AI. And the whole, every time we do a Google search or every time we do something within AI, it is using a massive amount of energy. And we're not talking about this. We're not, my kids don't necessarily know this. My grandkids don't necessarily know this. We're being pushed a future without necessarily realizing the energy demands of that future. And so for me, it's important to understand the why, and then think about, oh, well, actually, AI also has huge copyright implications within the cultural sector. It's often really debated. So I came away from that thinking, right, I really need to work out where we're using AI from an access point of view, where we're using it erroneously, where we shouldn't be using it. Are we
How do you mean from an access point of view, to use AI from an access point of view?
So, for example, as somebody who's deaf, a lot of my captioning is AI generated. So if I went, no, let's ban AI, I'd actually be cutting off my ability to communicate with people in the world. A lot of visually impaired audio description is now AI generated. Every time we do, I need to get from A to B, what's the best way of doing it? We're using AI. So we're using it all the time. But trying to work out what the energy implications of that are, and where can we reduce it, and where can we not reduce it, I think is something that I really want to do. I can't just go ban this, without knowing where I if it, and also where else can we get energy from? There are other sources. You know, we do know that there are natural powered energy sources that can be really, really useful. Have we really explored those? You know, solar, wind power. Have we really explored those, wave power, as much as we can do? Because surely we should be looking there first.
So let's talk about the people power. You know, if we have to engage everyone in this, and you also write about this in your blog about going green and climate justice and disability, and how to center it around everybody, how to center climate justice in it, and also to go beyond those comments that I used to, that climate justice is disability justice, marginalized people are disproportionately impacted by environmental issues, and all those. There's a lot of those slogans
Yeah.
the climate movement use.
But how do we actually take that and make it into something tangible? I think
Yes, and also from a cultural perspective, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's really practical things, you know. If you're running an event, have you put captions, sign language interpreter? Have you thought about accessible parking? Have you thought about, online, access? Have you made sure that the people who you're invited to speak are representative? Because quite often, a disabled person will take more notice of another disabled person, talking on a particular issue. So making things as representative as we can. There are practical things that we can do that slowly over time will broaden our networks and make them open to a wider range of people. But I honestly think one of the main things that we can do is to offer a space to listen rather than just tell people off. Because if we're saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you can't do that, why would you come along and be shouted at for an hour? It doesn't, there's no reason but something that says, come and tell me why this is so difficult. Come and tell me it from your perspective. Let us help you find ways through that actually work for you. And to do that with an openness rather than we have all the answers. And that's really, really hard for experts. It's really hard for people who've got degrees and spent years researching to recognize that their knowledge is finite and doesn't include everybody. And the fact that other people out there who don't have that same academic qualification might know something that you don't. I think opening up to that and opening up spaces for that is something we can all do and should do.
So I got, well, not an idea, but so to take this discussion we're having today and pushing it further, I don't know if Klimakultur can do it, but to gather in one of those cultural spaces that we have in the culture sector, but to gather people, the organizations working on accessibility and disability issues, gather them with the cultural sector, with organizations working on culture, and also invite in the climate and environmental organizations. So you have like those three different sectors, but coming together in a room. Could that push the discussion forward?
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing is we want to create a game. We want to create a game that helps people have those difficult conversations. We did it before. We created something called Cards for Inclusion, which is a game. It's free. It's online. We've now got a version in Portuguese. We've got a version in Spanish for Latin American countries. We've got a version we did with Taiwan, but the English version is up on the website. Anybody can download it. And you have an event, an artifact, and a barrier. And the idea is you just pick 3 cards out at random, and in a group, you discuss how would you get over that barrier at that event in order to get access to that particular artifact or whatever. And it's no more than a way of holding a conversation. It's about a way of just getting people to put down what they think they know and to actually have an amusing, interesting conversation and to get people focused on solutions. And we want to create something similar that brings up some of these issues around disability, access, climate justice, and the feelings that we have around them, you know, like shame, like injustice, and allows people to open that out. So give us a year or so and we'll be able to give you something to play at that event where everybody can start as equals and learn more through the conversation. Because we found that gamifying things, giving people a way through and a way to start the conversation can be a really useful prompt. And that's our next thing to focus on.
Oh, maybe we should get some Norwegian organizations inspired by that, because I know that there are some gamifications and cards and talking questions, in place already, but not about climate justice or climate into this. So thank you for that idea, Jo. I think that's super important.
Yeah, for us, we don't think, if we're saying one size doesn't fit all, then we don't think 58 billion guides is going to help. We think it is about changing people's way of thinking to be more inclusive in everything that they do. And then that spirals out into every movement, but particularly the environmental movement, actually taking that on board and listening. But any of those games are about listening as much as they are about solving.
Thank you. So you have a background from the arts as well. Do you think art itself can contribute to further this discussion?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say probably over 20% of the work that we create has an environmental angle to it, because that's what artists want to create at the moment. There's a massive interest because of because it's so important. So we're funding a lot of work that talks about the environmental crisis in various different ways. We funded a piece for swimming pools that was about water poverty, and recently, which was beautiful piece. We've created, there's a drone piece that's being done with Turkey at the moment, which is about contrasting different land masses and the ways in which we use them. But I think artists will always do it best. Artists give us a window on the world. They give us a way of looking afresh at something that we might not be seeing. And for me, disabled artists do that better than non-disabled artists, because we're always bringing a new angle in, because we have to. It's part of the way we live our lives. So I'm really interested to see what's coming up in the future from artists working in this field. I've seen some beautiful work. And and some incredibly thought-provoking work. I think some of the immersive work that's coming out has a real opportunity to thrive here too, because it can reach a scale. But again, we have to build it in a sustainable way. We can't be as wasteful as we have been in the past around the way that we create work. So again, when we commission artists, we don't say you have to do this, you have to do that. We do say, what do you need to know in order to make your work as sustainable as it can be? Where are you in your journey on that? How can we be helpful? And we do bring groups of artists together for peer learning, because we don't have all the answers, but we have a lot of contacts that we can pass people on to.
Oh, that's interesting. I saw the sustainability manager at Netflix, and yeah, not that that's a perfect world at all, but she said one good thing, and that's that they want to provide information to writers so they can confidently write about climate issues into the writing when they're writing movies or TV series and all, and not to demand them to do that, but just to give them the confidence to portray the world in a way
We
which is
have to let artists be artists. If we
Mm.
put them in straitjackets, they can't do what they need to do. But absolutely, helping people individually get further along their own journey, I think, is a great thing we can all be doing.
So, do you have any artist at the present who inspires you? Have you seen anything lately who made you think or feel or react or go into a deep depression?
I try not to get too depressed by artwork. I'm trying to think of the last pieces that I'm seeing, seen all the things that I'm seeing most recently. I'm still very amazed by a really old piece, which was actually part of the Unlimited in 2012, which is Sue Austin's piece. It's called Creating the Spectacle, but it's most known by the title Underwater Wheelchair. And it's a VR piece. It's also in 360-degree cinemas, and there's also a portable 360 rig that means it can go into a village hall and be experienced in 360. And it's a wheelchair that's underwater, with Sue in it, in a summer dress, her hair flowing freely through the water. And what that fills me with every time that I see it is the way in which freedom is thought of differently by different people. Most people assume a wheelchair is a symbol of restriction. That's not what disabled people see a wheelchair as. It is a way of agency in the world. It is freedom to go and explore. It is, if you have been in your house unable to get out of your house because you've not had a chair, and then you have access to it, it's the absolute epitome of freedom. And to see Sue gliding through coral reefs and moving around, it just gives this sense of freedom linked to a wheelchair that I've never, ever, ever seen before. And that fills me with hope. If we can get people to reimagine the future and see the beauty in different ways of thinking, then we can change the world. We can change the things that we do. So it's not a piece that directly speaks to climate emergency, but it speaks to reframing how we think. And they're the kinds of pieces that I really love most, when I see something that changes how I think.
Oh, wow. Thank you. A piece of art or TV, if we can call TV art, that has really made an impression on me these days is there's a Danish director called Thomas Vinterberg, who got an Oscar for the movie about drinking a few years back, about Danes who drank a lot. And he has a new TV series called Families Like Ours, about Denmark being shut down due to climate change because the water is coming in. So you have to evacuate a whole country.
Wow.
And I'm Danish, from the flat part of Denmark near Germany. and I live in the Norwegian mountains. And I often joke about how useful it will be in the future for my Danish family that I have a house in the Norwegian mountains. And then to see a piece of fiction about such an, I'm almost starting crying just talking
Yeah,
about it, because I didn't know how much I'm worried about it,
yeah,
and how much a piece of fiction like that about privileged white Danish people from north of Copenhagen being climate refugees, how much that can start us thinking about how many people in the world who are already climate refugees, who have to
yeah,
take the decisions if can they bring their animals, which members of the family should they bring when they leave, should they bring the brother which they don't like, all those questions as a climate
yeah,
refugee. So
yeah. It sounds like it
yeah.
has real. I mean, I think television is a really great way of reaching into the wide demographics that we absolutely need to. Um, I think all art is. I love, public art, displays at bus stops and stuff like that. And I love going to events in parks. I think where we're bringing the unintended audience with us as well, that really starts to be important in these debates. Otherwise, we are just talking in a bubble if we're just creating work for white cube galleries.
So yeah, making art accessible for more people.
Yeah.
So we are finishing in a few minutes, and if anyone has any questions or comments, they are, of course, it would be lovely to, they can post them in the comment section. But I'd like to ask you, Jo, because I have to, Klimakultur is placed in the mountains of Norway, in Valdres. And on Monday, I'm doing a workshop in Bergen, which is on the coast. And now it's cold, there's a lot of snow, but Sunday, Monday, everything is going to get warmer, and it's maybe going to rain. And I know I'm very worried about traveling to Bergen and back again, because that's a road that gets shut all the time. And there's, land masses, yeah, blocking the road, and things can happen. And I have to prepare when I travel to do cultural stuff. And this is changing while we are here, while in
Yeah.
as we
Yeah.
speak.
But why don't we yet have A, B, and C? Why don't we go, okay, well, if these conditions are like this, then I'll be there in person. If these conditions are like this, then we'll do this remotely. If these conditions are like this, then we're going to postpone to the 3rd of March. We're not thinking cleverly enough to be able
So
to give ourselves multiple options. But we could plan like that from the start. And then you wouldn't be left with that paralysis of decision making. It would be, oh, actually, this has happened, therefore we're taking this route through. I
so
don't want you to get stuck on a flooded road.
no, but I also think that a lot of artists, they are traveling, and if those artists have accessibility issues,
Yeah,
those issues becomes even, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the event that I was to attend tonight, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the marketing now is we're releasing more tickets. They clearly know that a
The
number of
cold.
people are not going to be able to make it. And I think it's really sad that instead of kind of going, actually, we are doing this over 3 nights. Let's just do it over 2 nights. Let's avoid the one that's so cold. We seem to see that as a failure rather than a sensible option. And I think if we plan multiple options, we'll be able to make better choices. And we maybe won't beat ourselves up so much if we can't attain the one thing that we really wanted.
Oh, thank you so much, Jo. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I'd like to ask you one final question before we end this webinar. And that is, if you would give me 2 tips on how we can create cultural arenas fit for a new climate and a new inclusive world in the future.
I think anything we do to plan for the future needs multiple people inputting into it. So I would always say bring more people in at the start of something in order to plan it further along, and to look for equality in those relationships, be that financial equality or power dynamics or whatever. But how do you make those planning stages truly equitable?
That's some great advice. Thank you so much, Jo, and thank you for people listening in. And I hope the cold doesn't get too bad, and I hope the weather doesn't get too bad either. So thank you, Jo. Take care, and thank you for joining us.
Lovely to be with you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.